All right, Emily, we're taking on the woke mob here today on the Deconstruction Zone.
Boo! Boo the woke mob. They're the problem.
They're the problem. No, so hey, you have a tweet you want to read, and you and I are self-avowed progressives to some degree, though we don't like to put ourselves in boxes, I would also say.
Yeah.
But
I like to be an open-minded gal.
I would agree with that. But I also think you and I, though there are things we lean left on and center and maybe right on certain things, we also can see that there are some negatives that come with progressive Christianity, maybe.
Yes.
Many positives. Also, it could be the same for conservative pros and negatives. But oftentimes, I think in the space we occupy, we just backpat progressivism and we never give it a critical eye.
Yes.
And so this week, we take on progressivism, the woke mob, with a little bit of a critical eye.
Yeah, I think this podcast could be seen, and maybe is, it kind of seems like, okay, deconstruct from conservative evangelicalism and end up in progressive Christianity. Mm-hmm. The conservative evangelicalism to progressive Christianity pipeline, if you will. But right. But we're going to take a critical eye. And even if that is where both of us did end up, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I saw this Facebook post actually from a guy who I heard on the Dirty
What's
Rotten
his name
Church
and
Kids.
address?
I mean, he probably wouldn't care. He's like a kind of Brady Harden. Have you heard that name? He was on the Dirty Rotten Church Kids, and he was kind of the advocate for full deconstruction, not just deconstruction to progressive Christianity or cool spirituality.
Right.
He was
let
it
get
burn
out of
it all.
Yeah.
So he posts this kind of regularly, and he's an interesting follow to me because I just I think it's important to see what people are saying negatively about both sides. Mm-hmm. And he's not necessarily saying negatively from people from my past, but he's I burned through progressive Christianity too. So mm-hmm. I think he has an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So he basically said progressive Christianity is the phrase, at least we're not like those other believers, transformed into a personality in industry. Mm. So first, immediate reactions, how does that land with you?
Yeah, I don't know how it when I first heard it, it makes me think, of course, when Christianity co-ops anything, it becomes a personality in an industry.
Yeah.
And so I think that's certainly true. But and I don't have a fully formed thought on this, but as you read it, what came into my mind was what does that mean in real life? What are the implications of that being a personality in an industry, and what does that look like in real life? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How maybe I'm a words guy, but I'm also a visual person. If you were going to reword that in your own words, how would you say it?
So there's two different rewordings that I'm thinking. I'm going to share both of them. One of them is progressive Christianity at its best is just kind of the lesser evil in a sense that there's still BS with Christianity, and maybe we're just the least problematic. And so that's
still problematic, but we're at the bottom of the barrel.
Because it's at least we're not like other believers is kind of saying yeah, we still have issues, but at least we accept gay people or something like that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The other way that I was thinking it is I guess I just thought of the self-righteousness of that idea of at least we're not like other believers is almost just well, we're the only ones that get it.
Yeah. So that's initially that. So it's helpful for you to rephrase it because I want to make sure I wasn't crazy for thinking that. What I initially thought, and we talked about this in the live episode we just did for the podcast on the Pharisee and the tax collector. Uh-huh. I kind of view it, and this is where I do see really hyper progressive people go. Is it's it becomes very self-righteous, and I'm going to hate myself for saying this. But I think this is where Mark Driscoll gets it right.
Oh, Jesus.
He hates progressivism in the woke world.
Really? I thought he was into it.
He's not at all. It's hard to tell. You have to really get underneath into the subtext. And I will say I'm saying that a little tongue-in-cheek. I don't fully agree with them. But it does. Progressivism becomes an idol. And it becomes an idol to our own Like progressivism at its worst, at its best, it's inclusive and it reimagines the word of God and the scope of what Jesus is trying to do, and it becomes far more inclusive. At its worst, though, it's like, I have figured it out and y'all are just idiots and you're not here yet. Like, it's the worst. It's why I hate progressive, because it means progress and growth, and everyone else that's not progressing or progressive is still behind and an idiot.
So I was going to interrupt real quick and backtrack and say, like, can you define progressive for me? And so you would say it just means like moving forward and growth?
When I use it for myself, I think it's progressivism in thought and like understanding more fully in our context and time as God is revealing more of God's self, and we're wrestling with scripture in a different way. And we're looking at it as God is speaking through ancient texts in our time and place. Like, how are we progressing to understand that? Like, when I say it, I genuinely mean this. I don't mean it politically at all.
Yeah.
But when I hear it said, I often hear it as a comparison of I'm not like them anymore. Like, I've progressed out of this and I am fully woke and I'm fully progressive, or I fully, like, it becomes like nirvana. Like, I finally arrived. Like, I've reached there. It creates an end goal to something that I don't think has an end goal, which I also think is what I didn't like about conservatism and what I don't like about progressivism. Is like, I don't think we're going to arrive.
And I think you're right on the money in that we tend to, as like progressives often tend to be like, okay, but we figured it out. And I think everyone kind of probably naturally tends to do that a little bit, is kind of thinks that, okay, people think they're right. I mean, that's the fact, like, that's the truth, is that people think they're right. However, I think a huge critique of progressivism that I think is very valid is we say like, oh, we're the most inclusive, like we include everybody. But in reality, we include people we agree with. Right. And it's like every time 100% real, every time you tell that story about like the lesbian couple sitting with the guy in the Make America Great Again hat, it makes me a little uncomfortable because it's like, that's like not as inclusive as we want, because the progressive view of inclusion, honest, like the true progressive view of inclusivity is just keep all the progressives together, including the gay people. Yeah.
So, and specifically in the church, that has been the issue, but it's also like anti-racism stuff. And it's like, it's a much wider scope than just sexuality. But yes, like I've said it before, like our non-negotiable is your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. Right. I really mean that. And we have people that are very conservative, very progressive. We have people that voted for Biden and people that voted for Trump, people that are straight and cis, and people that are LGBTQ plus, right?
Yeah.
And I love the mosaic that paints, but I've talked to people that are progressive before, and they're like, well, you need to fix the conservatives, right? And like, I don't think inclusion means being progressive necessarily, but I think progressives think inclusion, I think they're connected together, you know? But like for me, like, and when we say, I post every week something like, we've saved you a seat, and when we say everyone's welcome, we mean it. A lot of people read that as LGBTQ plus people, but I mean that to everyone. I really do. But where does the rubber meet the road, right? Like everyone has a line of who's not welcome.
Yeah.
And right now, like we're on the inclusion kick of gender and sexuality. Yes. And I think that's great. And it needs a conversation that needs to be happening. But we all have a line where we're like, I'm not drawing here. Like, is it a certain political party? Is it a certain sin? Is it like, what is it? Like we were talking, you, Dustin, and I off air about something that we don't necessarily need to mention, but like I think most people would be like, I'm not including that person here. Like we have a line that we're gonna draw. And I always wonder, and this isn't necessarily the topic, but like when we say inclusion, how far do we really want to take it, and are we going to be about that life? And I always wonder if people are really going to be about it or not.
And I think that I think inclusion, I think we say the same thing with open-mindedness. Like I really often feel like I hear progressives be like, well, we're the ones that are open-minded and willing to hear other points of view. And it's like, well, are you willing to listen to someone that you like are sure you disagree with? Like I remember my boyfriend's also like pretty progressive, and I have a close friend and a coworker, and she's pretty conservative. And I remember he asked me one time, he's like, well, why don't you like push back and like tell her why she's wrong? And I was like, because I have stuff to learn from her. Right. And like she has an experience way different than mine. Like she she like immigrated here and is very conservative. And I'm like, I'm fascinated as to like how you ended up there. And I want to hear that. And this is very political and less religious, but it's like, to me, it's not open-minded and it's not inclusive to be like, yeah, I'll let you talk just so that I can tell you why I think you're wrong. To me, true open-mindedness is like letting someone talk and being open to the idea that your mind might be changed. Like, to me, that is the heart of progressivism.
Yeah.
At its core, I don't think it's what we've made it.
Right. I think that's right. And I think at its worst, like being really progressive is being the most closed-minded you can be.
Yes.
In the same way that being conservative, a hyper-conservative fundamentalist would be like the language you use a lot. Like it becomes very closed-minded to my ethos of life or my religious convictions or my political stance. Like think about like if we'll use the Make America Great Again. Like you go to a UCC church that or a Unitarian church that's like very open, affirming, progressive.
Yeah.
Like outwardly they have rainbow flags, Black Lives Matter, all these things. If you walked in that church, you would feel the opposite of welcomed. But they have a sign like if you had a
MAGA hat on.
Yeah. But their sign also says everyone's welcome, right? And so I think that's very closed-minded. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think progressivism at its worst can do is say, like, I've progressed, I've reached nirvana, I've reached right thought. Therefore, what you just talked about with your coworker, I then have nothing to learn from this person.
Yeah.
And I think regardless of where you fall on any spectrum of thought or anything, like if we've reached the point of saying, I have nothing more to learn from my fellow humans and from God, I think we've missed the point.
I want to like bring it to religion a little bit because I feel like I'm like currently getting convicted as we're talking because I do work really hard to try to stay open-minded even that doesn't mean not having beliefs and that doesn't mean not feeling strongly about your beliefs, but right. I think to make space to truly listen and to like be willing to have your mind changed or even just like seeing new nuance in things, even if it's not like my mind on this issue 100% changed. But to see nuance based on someone with a different perspective, I think is so important. I think I think it's a little easier for me to do that politically than it is religiously. I feel very willing and open to talk to people of other faiths and be like, oh, like, how can I, like, I've been talking a lot, I feel like in more recent episodes, especially about like weaving this tapestry of spirituality. Mm-hmm. I don't really want a thread in the tapestry of conservative Christianity.
Right.
And that is almost innocent. It kind of reminds me back to this tweet or this post of like, I'll hear out other people, but in regards to Christianity specifically, I'm the one that's not like other believers. And that goes back to the idea of like this lesser than the lesser evil in a sense that like if conservative Christianity, I think basically what I'm trying to say is I think sometimes in my mindset, I make conservative Christianity the enemy instead of seeing it as another way that I can like know God.
Yeah. And like, let's be honest, it was a way that you came to know God, right?
100%.
So it's like it played a pivotal role in your life, even if destructive at times. Like it was, without it, you're not here today.
I think
like,
it unavoidably is a part of my tapestry, but I think it's hard for me to currently weave it in, if that makes sense.
So what do you think you could learn from, like, if you were going to weave something in or you were going to learn something or let it speak truth in an area that's like being vulnerable? Like, so I said this to someone yesterday. I don't know if this fully answers the question I'm asking you, but I was talking to someone about my seminary choice and I was like, why I went to, there's a very progressive seminary in St. Louis that was right down the road from my house, chose not to go to it. I went to a more conservative seminary because I said, it was a little bit of a short summary that doesn't do justice, but essentially like I was like the conservatives do a better job academically and theologically creating frameworks even if I don't agree with them, and so I wanted to be around that. And so like I owe a lot of my frameworks, even if I don't agree with them, to more conservative theology, I would say. Yeah. Even if it was in pursuit of building a new one, maybe. So for you, like what is something, if you could think about it, that either you have had speak into it or maybe you're like, I need to let this speak in from that?
I mean, I do have like fundamentalist friends or conservative Christian friends for sure that I like see pretty regularly. And we talk, and I think, again, as I'm like trying to be self-reflective, when I like hear them talk about God or them talk about Jesus, I'm like, oh, like that's really lovely and sounds like it's worked really well for them.
Yeah.
But I think I do definitely have like a wall up when I talk to them. And I'm
like a wall. Why do you think?
Because I know that it's caused me pain. And so I think it's...
So not because of them necessarily. It's like their thought process.
I think it's self-protective, and I don't think that's inherently wrong. Because I think there are other people listening that probably maybe relate to doing that in talking... Oh, I do think it's helpful, though. Like, the friend that I'm thinking of, the, like, more fundamentalist or conservative Christian friend, I made that friendship after I deconstructed, which is a little bit different than a friend like from your past.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit harder because you're kind of like, I'm trying to pretend that I'm someone I'm not, or I'm like all that. But I think with her, I don't know, I guess, but I think like how have I let her shape my spirituality or let her like inspire my spirituality or think differently? I think that I don't think I have an answer. I think I've talked about like my new PCA friends and how they've shown me that something that was harmful to me can be really beautiful and healing to somebody else. And that has like helped me maybe soften. But I think to say like I've taken their beliefs as my own or I've let them shape my beliefs, I don't think I've like given that window of opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to introduce a new segment I want to call Danny Mansplain Spirituality to Emily. Brought to you by Mars Hill Church.
Thank you.
No, one thing that I was thinking about, like, you're the most progressive Calvinist I've ever met. You're the most deconstructing. And I think when I think about that, though, it's like, I think that's some ways letting like your, like the conservative framework to how you really knew who God was. And you've let the beauty of who you know God to be now inform that. And like for you, I think Calvinism's a rubric or a lens or whatever to process God. But you've become, even if you still think through some of those things or it's your natural lens, like I think you've used Calvinism to see God in a more beautiful way, which I think is interesting. Like you haven't completely thrown that away. And so I just think about it in terms of like something from the more conservative or what was harmful to you or what you disagree with. It has in some ways spoken into your deconstruction process and helped you see God in new ways. But it was something that was probably harmful to you in the worst seasons of your deconstruction, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess when I think of Calvinism these days and how my Calvinism persists, it persists in my universalism. And I feel very smart using all these ism words. But like, in a sense that in my universalism, I have no problem with the idea that God could override someone's will for the sake of us all entering paradise. Like that idea doesn't bother me. And I think that is a result and a product of growing up Calvinist. And I find a lot of beauty in universalism. And that has been something that has really just like, I don't know, been really sweet to me. And so in a sense, yeah, it has informed it. But I think the idea of like letting it still inform me or new things to inform me is like kind of hard.
Yeah. I only asked, I just like, and I was trying to think about and I'm trying to think about in my life as well. Like how have I, like, I've probably become more, and I don't know, but I've noticed this in my preaching. Like I've tried to be more literal in how I've been reading scripture lately. Even though I'm not a scripture literalist, but I'm like, I've asked myself when I'm reading some of these stories, like, what would it gain me to view this as 100% literal? Yeah. Or if I think it's allegory, 100% factual, right? Like, and I don't know that I always believe that, but I've started to try to ask myself some of those questions. And I don't know if it's been helpful or not, but I'm just thinking about it because I often can be like, this is what I think. This is my framework. Let's build a sermon around this. And I have to realize, not everyone in the church thinks like I do. Someone just said the hardest thing that they think about preaching to the well is that we have so many different thoughts. And I was like, it's true. Like I can't ever just be like, here's our one size fits all thing.
I mean, you can't pander.
I cannot pander. And I love to freaking pander. So it's been interesting though. And so I'm just trying to think about that in my own, like, how do I, And sometimes when I feel like, and this is, I'm just like thinking and like really real time processing.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I think I'm doing the best work of like theological work, it's more conservative theological frameworks that I naturally gravitate to.
Well, I think when you're doing the best theological work.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out a better way to say than best, but like.
Well, it feels the most studious because I guess English is hard. I can't really use my students as an example, but let's say like a math, like in a math class, if students were like, well, what if it was like more gray than that? Everyone would be like, shut up.
Right.
Like it feels not as smart to say that in certain areas. And so I think if obviously certainty and clear lines and clear claims feels smarter.
Right. But also, like, isn't that what progressives are? They are certainly just something else. Like, it's made, like, I'm certainly inclusive. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I'm with you.
They both end in certainty. It just looks different.
So what is, like, how do we combat that then? Part of me wants to be like, I want to be certainly inclusive.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like, leave that up in the air necessarily. But I also don't want to be someone who isn't willing to hear other perspectives.
Well, I think first, almost certainly, we have to start canceling people. I think that's what we have to start doing.
That is absolutely how we do it.
Yeah, I think it's the one. It's the only path. I mean, for me, this isn't exactly what you're asking, but I think like if inclusion is our goal, and we'll use that as like I want to be progressive and I want to be inclusive.
Sure.
That's what we mean by that. I think we have to ask ourselves where the line stops and why it stops there, and then say, is that what Jesus would do?
Yeah.
And I would say, again, we're like really taking a hate dump on progressivism right now, but I think we're allowed to do that because we both classify ourselves as that maybe. But like,
I'm going to spin us a little bit pretty soon, but keep going.
I totally forgot what I was going to say, actually.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I interrupted you.
I interrupt you all the time. And I just mansplained to you earlier. So,
well, I guess what I was processing is going back to this post of like, at least we're not like other believers. What is progressive Christianity's, I don't want to say sell it, but like, what's the better pitch than that? Because I do think there's a sense in even moments like when I think about progressive Christianity, like when I invite people to church, sometimes I'll say like, well, don't worry, you're not going to deal with this and this and this. Like it is kind of this like almost like bashing of conservative Christianity to sell progressive Christianity.
Yeah, which is unfair, right?
Yeah.
But it's also not unfair.
Well, I mean, people have real stories and real hurt. And so sometimes to hear like I'm thinking about like LGBTQ people in our congregation who have said like, I have been to places where I've been baited and switched and said I was welcome and then I wasn't. For us to say very clearly that that's not what happens here is very inclusive and very necessary and very like helps people breathe easy. So I don't think it's wrong to necessarily use that, but I think progressive Christianity has to have a bigger pitch than that, than just, well, I think sometimes we say like, we're everything you loved about church with none of the BS. And I don't really think that that's fair to say.
Yeah. I don't know. This is one of the things I love and hate about our podcast is like we're processing. And so we say things that are sloppy and messy. Yeah. But I think it's real to who we are. I would go back to the thing I've said before is like what's compelling about conservative Christianity. It's like, you know, you're in because you know who's out. It's the same thing in what we're trying to do. We say we know who's in because we know who's out. We just think no one's out. Like that's I think we're trying to say but we have to be explicit about saying like LGBTQ plus people are in because the bait and switch. Yeah. We have to elevate voices of women because that doesn't happen in a lot of churches. We do not anywhere close to as good of a job in racial justice, but we have to talk about that, right? Like and do a better job because churches say they're about it, but they're not. And I would actually say we're closer to saying we're about it and not because we haven't like where's the rubber meet the road in that, right? But I don't know. Like I just think it's hard because we all want to know we're in. We all want to know we're in. And we have to say we're better than, we're different than, or who's out to make that claim. Or we don't. You know what I mean? Like, maybe we don't. Maybe we don't have to say that.
But it's like, even if we say everybody's in, is someone who's like hyper fundamentalist, would they feel welcome at the well?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
The question for them would be like, what makes you not feel welcome? Is us welcoming other people making you feel not welcome? Is it that you think we don't take the Bible seriously enough that makes you feel like there would be nothing from a tactical standpoint about their experience to make them feel unwelcome? What would make someone feel unwelcomed is our like belief system of who Jesus is and what he's about. But we would never make someone feel shamed for being a fundamentalist.
That's true.
But we would also say, like, this is who we believe. Like, again, your seat can't cost someone else theirs. And so, like, if you're fine creating space for other people and wrestling with where you are and maybe staying where you are and maybe shifting and going more right or more left, that's fine. But the question has to be, like, at what point do your beliefs start taking away space for other people?
Yeah.
And that's where I start to take issue. But I'll also not shame you for that. Like, because I know we have fundamentalists at the church. And we have people that don't believe in Jesus at the church.
Yeah.
And neither of them have ever felt excluded. I hope. Maybe
right. Well, I remember when the last time I preached, I invited a pastor friend of mine who is like very like conservative Christian. And I served communion. And I remember I was like, no way he's going to get up and take communion. Like, he's not going to feel appropriate that I'm an unordained woman, like serving communion. And he came up and he got communion from me. And so I think that honestly challenged me in a sense that sometimes I assume conservative Christians will feel some type of way. And in reality, they won't. Or they'll push past that. Just how sometimes I push past things that I'm uncomfortable with.
Yeah. I wonder who has the higher threshold to push past it, if it's progressives or conservative Christians. Like would a progressive person put themselves in the situation your conservative friend did? Like, to come to support you in a place that they don't fully agree with, to receive a sacrament they view to be holy. Like, do you think the progressive person would have done the counter to that? Like, go to a fundamentalist church, sit through a sermon, do the altar call because their friend was the one doing it?
I mean, that's hard to think about.
Yeah, I think I remember your friend coming and I remember having lots of thoughts about it.
Yeah.
But I actually think it's like, good on him for doing it. Like, he supported you as a person. He gave really kind words about your sermon and about the service. Like, I think all of that was great. And the question is like, which goes to the whole point of this is like, do we think we're better than them? Therefore, like, we won't engage with them, you know? Like, would we do it in the counter? Okay.
Here's what I bet. I know that we're kind of like hitting 30 minutes, but what I'm struggling, I guess, with that question is like, and I think where maybe other listeners would be like, is like, this is maybe really crappy to say, and maybe I'm about to like frame the whole thing that's wrong with progressives. But I guess my struggle with like, as a more progressive Christian going into a conservative Christian space, I've definitely done it. Is it like it's a little bit triggering and feels a little bit sucky. Like, whereas I doubt, and maybe this isn't fair for me to say, I doubt that friend felt really triggered coming to our church because we didn't necessarily like bash anybody or say things that was harmful. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe that's really crappy to say, but that's kind of my devil's advocate.
I think that's so this is maybe an incomplete comparison, but I think about the number of avid Catholics we have at our church. Like, we had a Catholic couple from New Jersey come and visit. Oh. And they came and they were friends of a couple at the church. And so they came to visit and they were in town. And they came and received communion, and we talked for a long time after. And for them, like, that's a holy, sacred thing that is like a sin to receive out. Wow. Like so that would have been, triggering is the wrong word, but like it's like that would be like they were doing it a sacrilegious thing by coming forward, but they compromised that because they felt like God doing something that they hadn't thought possible in that space. So I don't know. Like, so I just like, I think it's hard to say what's triggering, what's sacrilegious if I'm not in their shoes.
Yeah, 100%.
Because like for your buddy, like there could have been things, maybe coming forward was like a huge compromise.
Yeah.
Maybe just sitting there listening
to a woman.
To a Jezebel preach.
But he made that sacrifice to be a friend.
Yeah. And I think that's at the core. Like, we've talked about this in the discipleship. To draw closer to Jesus is surrendering something. And I think for some people, it's surrendering our religiousness.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's surrendering for like really progressive people, like are being so woke, maybe like what we have to surrender a little bit, or thinking we're better than everyone.
Yeah. Well, I remember on, I guess it was Father's Day, my dad just really wanted all of his kids to come to church with him. Mm-hmm. Not all of us feel the exact same way about spirituality. And their church is pretty cool. I don't agree with everything their church thinks, but I like went and had a really good time and like had a like definitely still felt like I connected to God in that space. And that was something that like I think to not go would have been way less open-minded. Or to go and be like, this is all gonna suck. I think part of it is going and like trying to find the good, which is what I don't know the inner workings of my friend's brain, but it seemed like he tried to do that by coming to communion. I was like, you are trying to find the good and finding the overlap of like, oh, we do agree on these things.
Yeah.
And I think that is really important, is pursuing unity over like nitpicking what we disagree on.
Yeah. And again, I think that's something we're letting go of, is like our desire to be perfectly and wholly right.
Yeah.
And, I think we could riff on this for a lot longer.
Yeah, you're right.
I think
but we need to wrap up.
We need to wrap up a little bit. So do you have any like final closing thoughts on it before we kind of shift into the closing time?
I don't, but I'm really glad we talked about this. And I don't know, I hope we don't put progressive Christianity on this pedestal in this podcast, because it also has issues. And I hope that what we actually put on a pedestal is being like Jesus, which is like actually including everybody and being open-minded.
Yeah, if I think there's anything about our thoughts and beliefs that we ever stop examining and calling out the shadow side of, then I want our audience and friends to call us out on that, because that's BS, right? Like we should, if we're about examining and deconstructing, then we have to always, like we're not just deconstructing the things we don't like.
Yes.
It should be examining and deconstructing all of the harmful things. And being progressive has harmful ideologies in it, and being conservative does. And it's not exclusive to one group. And politically or religiously. And
I will say, I think that makes it hard, because I think sometimes when people step into progressive spaces, they think there's going to be no more BS. And that just isn't the case. And then they're let down. And then like more stuff happens. But in reality, like, not that this is an excuse to be bad people, but like there's going to be BS everywhere. And so how can we just continue to be examining and be thoughtful versus just being like, when am I going to find the perfect area and the perfect ideology?
Yeah. And on this side of eternity, I don't think we will find the perfect anything, right?
Damn. It kind of sucks, but...
It does suck. But it's also like, wouldn't it make perfection that much better when we finally get to experience it?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
I feel exhausted, actually, about this conversation.
I kind of want to skip our other segments.
You just want to get the hell out of here.
I feel like we said a lot, and I think that my recommendation is to just like sit with this.
Yeah.
Because we kind of came in like guns blazing a little bit. Yeah. We kind of came in hot.
Yeah, it's funny. We didn't fight, except for we fought with I feel like I fought with myself.
Me
this
too.
Whole time.
And I think that's important.
Yeah.
Even though it's not the most fun feeling.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I feel like convicted about my own thoughts. And like I said earlier at one point, like I feel like I actually think we've had a lot of episodes. This will be 70 something. This has our highest potential to piss more people off, because it's like our base. We've essentially called a lot of our base out, but in calling ourselves out.
100. Yeah. If you feel called out, we're also feeling called out.
Yeah, we're going to go to lunch after this, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more conversations about how awful we feel about ourselves.
But I think that that's okay as long as you don't go into a shame spiral. I think there's like healthy self-examination versus shame spiral. Don't get into a shame spiral.
Don't get into shame spiral. Because if we know one thing, comfort is a slow death.
So we are having a quick life, I guess.
That's right. All right, Emily.
All right.
This was fun.
This was fun and hard.
Hard things can be fun. That's one thing I would that's my recommendation. Yeah. We think only fun things are easy. Hard things are fun things and good things.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that like to have this conversation with you. So I'd also say like find a trusted friend, because it's hard to have all these thoughts by yourself and just be like, damn.
Yeah.
You know.
Also, you'll never have these thoughts if it's just you because we're naturally going to tell ourselves how awesome we are.
And like, I think also maybe this is a weird recommendation, but like, don't doctor your social media feed to be like a bunch of stuff that you agree with. That's something that I think there's a line where I hate follow a lot of things and that's not helpful and not good for my mental health. But to like make sure that, because I mean, think about the algorithm is we're constantly tailoring what we're like intaking content to be things that we love. Yeah. And so to like, even like, I'm thankful for this follow, even though maybe, I mean, I kind of did agree with that, but like, but it challenged me 100%. It wasn't fun to read because it's a group I tend to like consider myself in. But I think, so I guess I'd also say like, fight the algorithm.
Fight the algorithm.
And with that being said, thanks for listening and embrace the journey. We're back on it. It's been a while since we've been same snaps. Same snap.